What's up, heathens?
How ya doing?
I'm the Godless engineer, and I critically analyze apologist claims to give you the best arguments and information so that you can stand up and use your voice. Today, we're going to be taking a look at some random YouTuber's attempt to disprove evolution. He says he has 10 reasons as to why evolution is false. Now, I'm sure he's only going to come out with the best pieces of information for us. He's definitely got scientifically accurate arguments against evolution, so I can't wait for this. There's not a lick of AIG, ICR, or any other creationist propaganda mill out there. There's definitely none of that in here. So, if you heathens want to fuck around and find out why evolution is false, then please stay tuned.
Hi, this is a short video on 10 reasons why evolution is false. Reason number 1 is unbiblical.
Oh, the fuck you say? You mean that some sky wizard that either wrote the Bible or inspired other dumbass hicks to write the Bible apparently got some shit wrong? No. Also, evolution being unbiblical is not at all an issue for evolution. It seems like it's an issue for the Bible.
A literal or plain reading of Genesis does not allow for long ages, nor does it allow for evolution. And if you want to know why we should take Genesis literally, I've done another short video on that topic. As well as this, the Bible teaches us that God created man and woman directly and personally. The Bible teaches that birds were created on day 5 and dinosaurs were created on day 6, contrary to the theory of evolution. And the Bible also teaches, more importantly, in Romans 5:12 and in other places, that there was no such thing as death before sin. And so therefore, we couldn't have had billions and billions of years of death until the first human sin.
So, going through this list from top to bottom, I agree that due to a literal reading of Genesis, that means that either evolution is wrong or the Bible is wrong. Obviously, the key assumption that this guy is making is that the Bible cannot be wrong or is not wrong. So anything that doesn't agree with the Bible is obviously wrong. And that is pretty much a good summation of any argument he's going to bring up here, especially when he starts with evolution's unbiblical, therefore it's wrong or false. I do agree that a literal reading of Genesis shows that there's not long ages as far as it comporting with Christian theology. And also evolution doesn't comport with a literal reading of Genesis. So I agree on this first point, but the mountains of evidence we have in like radiometric dating that show that deep time actually exists and that this universe is 13 some odd billion years old and that the earth is 4.54 billion years old is massive. Like the amount of evidence we have for that is astronomical, and that overwhelms any kind of literal reading of some sky wizard's journal. Next, God created man and woman directly. Again, boiling this down to what it's actually meaning, an old sky wizard created man out of dust and then blew life into him. And because the man couldn't go around and fuck other creatures and procreate, God therefore fashioned a woman out of one of Adam's ribs and for the primary purpose of fucking and propagating with her. It's either an evolutionary explanation for how humans came to exist on this earth, or magical sky wizard did it. Which one are you going to believe? I mean, come on. It's got to be the magical sky wizard, right? And then next, yeah, the Bible does have the birds being created before dinosaurs, which is antithetical to the fossil evidence that we have, showing that birds actually developed evolutionarily from dinosaurs. Again, we come to this position of either the Bible's wrong or our evidence is wrong. And this guy's just like, fuck that. If the Bible says this, then it's got to be this. There's no way it can be this over here, even though it's physical evidence and empirical evidence, scientifically testable evidence, and it comports with reality. We found it in reality. No, I prefer the magical sky wizard explanation. And then finally, I don't understand what it means for everything, every organism to be immortal. That sounds like some weird sci-fi shit or some kind of weird fantastical world that existed, like a totally different universe that existed where everything works completely differently. So I have no idea how to process, at least on a scientific point of view, this whole no death before sin. Well, sin is transgressing God's opinions. And if you do that, then apparently that's what made us mortal. And I just don't know how to process that without like a decoder ring or something. And I just don't have one of those laying around here. I just have a dick wand.
And the second reason that evolution is false is that it is unscientific. And
oh, it's unscientific, you say? Surely you have some scientific reasoning behind this. Maybe you have some empirical evidence to show that it's not scientific. Please, do, go ahead.
This might surprise you. I hope it does. The scientific method is a method of testing, observing, repeating, and recording. And so we know gravity is true because we can throw something up and down, and we can do it again, we test, repeat, observe, and then we can record how far it falls and how quickly to get the speed of gravity. Evolution cannot be observed. Evolution cannot be repeated. It has been tested on bacteria, on flies, but what we find after hundreds of generations of bacteria and flies is that bacteria remain bacteria, flies remain flies, finches remain finches, dogs remain dogs, and humans remain humans. Evolution do claim to have support in a form of record in the fossil record, but we'll look at that a little bit later in this video.
So, his evidence is just making baseless claims that are not true whatsoever. He provides no evidence that evolution's not observable. He provides no evidence that evolution can't be repeated, which is contradicted by the whole evolution has been tested idea, because, you know, he has this weird understanding of evolution, and I'm guessing he follows along the lines of, well, there's macroevolution, there's microevolution, which, if you're really in the know about evolution, you would call microevolution adaptation. And as we all know, adaptation still evolution. Like it's a part of evolution, but it's evolution in action, because evolution is how a group of organisms change, adapt to their environment so that they can survive in it, and they pass those changes on to their descendants, and in that way they adapt and they change to their environment, and they change morphologically, physically, chemically, all these other ways. So that's how evolution works, and it starts with adaptation. So if you can see adaptation in the lab, then you've effectively proven that evolution is happening. But not only that, we have witnessed, like, speciation in nature. There have been cases where we've seen one organism evolve or adapt into a different organism that has to be classed differently. Now, it's not more big morphological changes, obviously. We're talking speciation, which, you know, you can have two different species of flies and they look, you know, eerily similar, but they are different. And he has this understanding of evolution of, like, more Pokemon evolution is how I usually describe it. He expects, like, a dog to, like, evolve into, like, a fucking cat, or, you know, crossing these cladistic lines. He doesn't seem to understand the law of monophyly that says that, you know, once you're a part of a single clade, you're always going to be part of that clade. You'll never jump from clade to clade to clade. You can't violate clades in that way. Once an organism is in the dog clade, it will always remain a dog, a canine. Even if it morphologically changes into something different in the future, it will still be a dog or a part of this canine clade. It'll never turn into a fish or some kind of, like, bird or something like that would violate the law of monophyly. The fact is that we have tested evolution in the lab. We have seen bacteria change and adapt to its environment and effectively changing its chemistry and how it works and all this other stuff. Like, we've been able to repeatedly show this in the lab. I mean, you could show this to high school students. And then finally, yes, evolution supports the claims that are made by the fossil record. The fossil record shows a progression from organism to organism. And we have evolutionary lines that we understand as we've been examining them, as we've discovered more fossils. We get a clearer and clearer picture of the evolutionary history of the Earth, of the organisms on this Earth. And Every time we make a fossil discovery, it only further confirms evolution. So I don't know what the fuck he's talking about on this slide.
The third reason that evolution is false is the reason of thermodynamics. We could say the second law of thermodynamics in particular.
I am going to make a bet here. This guy does not understand the second law of thermodynamics if he thinks that the second law of thermodynamics refutes evolution. So let's see.
And the idea of entropy. And this really states in layman's terms that things work from order to chaos or from order to disorder. If you make a hot cup of tea and leave it on the side, it will go cold. Heat dissipates in the natural environment. If you leave things alone, if you leave an ordered system alone, it will eventually break down into chaos and disorder. And so you see, for instance, if you were to buy a car and just leave it sat on the streets and you came back to it 50 years later without having driven it, it wouldn't work. The battery would be dead. It would be rusty because entropy happens. The same for a garden. I'm sure that someone watching this is perhaps a keen gardener. I've done a little bit myself. And I know this for a fact. If you leave your garden for weeks and weeks and months, the garden does not get better. It gets worse. Things that are ordered and organized, left to themselves, nature left to itself, becomes disorganized, disordered, and chaos. This means it's a downward spiral, whereas evolution requires an upward spiral. And so evolution is in conflict with the second law of thermodynamics and the idea of entropy.
Well, so he kind of understands the second law of thermodynamics in a weird way, because on the one hand, when he describes like the battery depleting over time, that's a good example of the second law of thermodynamics. A coffee cup going from hot to cold, that's a good example of the second law of thermodynamics. A rusty car is not a fucking good example. A garden is not a good example. Him saying that, an organized garden will descend into chaos, just simply meaning that, it will no longer be an organized sort of garden. It just, things pop up and sprout everywhere. Weeds get in there and everything like that. When we're talking about evolution, we're not talking about a disorder like that. What we're talking about is moving to the equilibrium point of zero energy or just equal energy. And so that's what the second law of thermodynamics is about. And that's why the tea or the hot going to cold and the battery losing its charge, those are good examples of that. Now, the key thing that he seems to not understand here are the differences between a closed system and an open system. In a closed system where there's a finite amount of energy that exists within the system, that energy will slowly run down to the equilibrium point. That's a closed system. Now, with an open system, you constantly have energy being introduced to the system. That is what the Earth is, an open system. We constantly get energy from the sun, and through that, we have what seems to be everlasting energy source. Well, I mean, the sun's going to go out one day, but for the purposes of like 4.5 billion years of evolution goes, there's a constant flow of energy being introduced. And so that means that the second law of thermodynamics does not apply here, and it does not refute evolution. Also, I want to point out with the garden, in the way to understand the second law of thermodynamics to, the discussion of evolution goes, if you leave a garden alone, it's not going to just die. It's not just going to wither and it's going to be barren. If that were the case, then, all plant life on this earth would have died out billions of years ago. But that's not what happens. You see, nature's going to fucking nature, okay? And because of all the new energy that's introduced to the system every day by the sun, that means that the plants will grow and they will overtake that garden. And I mean, sure, it's disordered to you, but it's ordered as far as nature goes, because that's what happens. Plants grow. When they go into hibernation, they look like they're dead, but then they come back whenever spring comes back around. And all of that is incredibly ordered, and nature is gonna fucking nature. So his whole garden idea here does not mesh well with the second law of thermodynamics either.
And fourthly, the idea of irreducible complexity.
Oh my fucking God. Really? Irreducible complexity? This is a made-up concept by creationists. They want to say that there are some systems out there that are irreducibly complex, meaning that you can't reduce them down to simpler forms. Typically, we see this with like bacterial flagellum or feathers or some shit. But in all cases of irreducible complexity that's claimed by creationists, we've been able to explain how those systems could have come about gradually through slow and small changes via evolution. So anything that he brings up here is just going to show his ignorance of evolutionary biology as well as just being able to do basic fucking research.
And so if you think of the human body and you think that we apparently went from the goo to you via the zoo, from a single-celled organism to a double-celled organism to a tadpole fish, etc., frog, we have to wonder how some of these things evolved. So if you think of our blood vessels, our hearts and our lungs, which evolved first? If it was our blood, how did it stay in our bodies and how did it pump around? If we had blood and blood vessels but no heart, again, how did it move? If we had a heart that was pumping but no blood to pump, what purpose does that serve? Rather, our circulatory system is a complete system that is dependent upon every part and dependent upon the lungs to get oxygen in and CO2. The same with eating. We have a mouth, we have a stomach, we have intestines, and we have waste disposal. Which of those evolved first? How can any of those have evolved independent of the others? They're a complete system that each relies on the other one to work.
All right, let's take these things one at a time. You got the circulatory system. You could do a brief Google search and you could figure all this shit out. But the circulatory system first developed as a simple diffusion in cells. And then it slowly, over time, developed into a more complex system that allowed the blood and oxygen and all those energy sources to be more evenly distributed throughout a body plan, which would resemble our body plan. I'm not saying it's perfect or nothing, obviously it's not. I'm just saying that it took a long time for the circulatory system to slowly evolve. And the reason why it evolved in the way that it has for many organisms, being this complex circulatory system, it's because it provides some advantages. It allows us to survive better. And so that is the advantage of the circulatory system that we have. And it develops slowly over time.
But even more complex than that is sexual reproduction. The idea is that single-celled organisms copied themselves asexually, but at some point in evolutionary history, evolution decided now you need genitals, now you need male and female. And how on earth does two creatures separately to each other evolve the right working bits in order to be able to reproduce, not just in the same creature, but in two different creatures at the same time?
So sexual reproduction obviously is pretty complex, just like any other system out there that you would want to explain through evolution. But basically it started off with asexual forms of reproduction, and then the development of sexual reproduction involved organisms that could switch between asexual and sexual reproduction. The sexual reproduction introduced a greater genetic variety and allowed organisms to be able to change quicker and adapt quicker to their environment and be more readily adaptable in their environment. So sexual reproduction seems to have a lot of benefits over asexual reproduction. Now, obviously, there are still organisms out there that reproduce asexually, like amoebas and other single-celled organisms, but it was obviously evolutionary advantageous for sexual reproduction to eventually develop because of the positive properties in the genetics, providing genetic variety and allowing organisms to change in a more fluid way than asexual reproduction would have allowed. So sexual reproduction develops slowly over time, just like these other things did. He needs everything to come into existence all at once, because that's what his Bible says, that everything popped into existence all at once. The magical wizard in the sky just went boop, and he created man. And then he fashioned the woman out of the man's rib. But the point is, everything went boop and came into existence all at once. Woo! So easy. An old fucking wizard could do it.
How does that work? The fifth reason is missing links. Here's just a screenshot from Wikipedia. I don't like Wikipedia nor use it as a source, but I just thought this was interesting.
I don't understand this particular way that evolution's proved false. The missing links in evolution, I don't see how this is going to fare well for him, because there are plenty of hominid species that are not Homo sapiens out there, and we're all connected. We're also all still apes, so we're related to the other great apes. We're still part of the great ape family, and so we should expect to see a slow transition from what we commonly think of as monkeys or apes or whatever into humans that are still monkeys and apes. We just look a little bit different. We should expect a slow, gradual change in that way, and that's exactly what we find in the fossil record. So I'm kind of curious as to where he's going with this,
because it's kind of misleading. Granted, on Piltdown Man, it does say eventually revealed to be a hoax, but it lists these things as if they're well-known missing links, as if they are part of the human evolutionary fossil record. And yet none of these things are actually human ancestors. Piltdown Man, Java Man, they are frauds. Homo habilis and Lucy, which is Australopithecus, they're not even considered by evolutionists to be human ancestors. But Wikipedia puts it in such a way that just by looking at that, you think, oh, these are all examples of human ancestors. Not so. They have yet to find evidence in the fossil record of any sort of pre-human, non-human, ape-like ancestor. It's just not there. The fossils they find, they're either human or they're ape. They're not one or the other.
Well, considering that he says ape-like ancestor, I mean, we're still apes, so obviously he doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about. I will need a citation for not even evolutionists, or more specifically evolutionary scientists or evolutionary biologists, would place like the Lucy fossil, the Australopithecus, and other hominids in the hominid clade. And I feel like the fact that they're classified as hominids, just like we're classified as hominids, means that what he's saying is bullshit. But all of the fossil evidence that we have for the other hominid species shows that there was a slow and gradual change from this proto-ape ancestor into what we are today. And all of this supports evolution. None of this proves that it's false. He says that there have been no fossils found. I'm sorry, but it's hard to hear that bullshit over all of this fucking evidence. Come on, man. It just takes a little bit of time to just type it into the computer and look it up, and you can figure it out. But of course, he's too busy getting that raw AIG bullshit, crushing it up and going, oh, Ken Ham's asshole. He's too busy sniffing up the crack that AIG's selling him. But in any case, the missing links are not proof that evolution is false. And also, he mentions how there are some fakes and frauds that are found in these missing links that are posted there. Scientists are the ones that rooted out that they were false, because we want our science to be as true to reality as possible. We don't want any fakes or frauds in there. So evolutionary scientists are the ones that rooted out the bullshitters who were trying to pass off these bullshit skeletons. All in all, I was not convinced by this video. None of the 5 reasons are reasons that evolution is false. He didn't provide any evidence in this video at all. All he provides is his basic underlying understanding of how we determine things are real in reality. And that's basically, as long as it comports with the Bible, then it's real. If it doesn't comport with the Bible, then it's false. And that's no way to go through life. That's a shitty method for determining what's truth and what's fiction. And something tells me that this guy in this video can't determine between truth and fiction. If you will, please go down below and let me know what y'all thought about this video. Let me know what you thought about the 5 points that this guy made. And I'd really love to hear what you guys think about it. While you're down there, why don't you smash that like button and subscribe if you like this kind of video. Don't forget to stand up and use your voice. Bye, heathens.